congratulation tales. Rose stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the strap of her black dress. It hugged her body in all the right places, the neckline plunging just enough to make her feel confident, sexy even. Her eyes traced the reflection of her collarbone, the smooth curve of her neck, and the way her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She hadn't felt this way in a long time. The soft click of a door opening made her glance up. Alex stood in the doorway, his tired eyes scanning her appearance. "What's the occasion?" he asked, his voice a monotone, thick with exhaustion. Rose held back a sigh. "Your best friend's party. We talked about this," she replied, keeping her tone even. The last thing she wanted tonight was another argument. "It's tonight. Don't tell me you forgot." Alex rubbed the back of his neck, his brow furrowing. "I've been swamped with work, Rose. I don't think I can." "You promised." Rose's voice was sharper than she intended, but she couldn't help it. This was supposed to be their night. She had spent weeks trying to get through to him, to make him see how much she needed his attention. But every time, work came first. Always. Alex sighed and ran his hands through his hair. "Fine. Let me get ready." Rose didn't respond. She watched him disappear into the bathroom, her reflection staring back at her, a mixture of sadness and frustration brewing inside her. This had been their routine for years now. Broken promises, forgotten plans, and the growing void between them. Alex had once been attentive, passionate even, but somewhere along the way, he had become distant, emotionally detached. He was physically present, sure, but emotionally, it felt like he was a million miles away. By the time they arrived at the party, Rose was already on edge. The mansion was as grand as she remembered, its towering gates opening to reveal a long, winding driveway lined with cars. The house itself was bathed in golden light, laughter and the sound of clinking glasses spilling out through the open doors. It was supposed to be a night of fun, of reconnecting, but Rose couldn't shake the knot of tension that had been tightening in her chest all evening. Alex parked the car and stepped out, adjusting the collar of his jacket. He looked handsome tonight, but even that wasn't enough to soothe the frustration bubbling inside Rose. She waited for him to join her, but he seemed distracted, his mind already elsewhere. Probably thinking about work, she thought bitterly. As they walked into the mansion, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and champagne. Rose smiled politely as they were greeted by familiar faces, though her mind was far from the conversations around her. She couldn't help but notice the way Alex's eyes darted around the room, always scanning, never really focused on her. It wasn't long before she felt someone's eyes on her. Turning slightly, she caught sight of a tall, handsome man leaning against the bar. His eyes met hers, and he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down her spine. He was dressed impeccably, his suit tailored perfectly to his frame. There was something about the way he looked at her, a spark of interest that Alex had long since lost. "Care for a drink?" the man asked, his voice smooth and confident. Rose hesitated, glancing over her shoulder to where Alex stood, engrossed in a conversation with someone from work. He hadn't even noticed her wander away. "Sure," she replied, taking the glass he offered. His hand brushed against hers, and the contact sent a jolt through her. They stood at the bar for a while talking, laughing. Rose hadn't felt this alive in years. The man, Daniel, as he introduced himself, was charming, attentive, and he made her feel seen. It was a dangerous feeling, one that whispered to her, urging her to lean into it. Across the room, Alex was oblivious. The party was just another event to him, another chance to network. He had no idea that his wife was standing just feet away, flirting with a man who was making her feel everything she had been missing for so long. The night was warm, and inside the mansion, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. People drifted through the vast rooms, some gathered in intimate conversations, others laughing boisterously with champagne in hand. But amidst the mingling crowd, Rose felt like the only two people in the room were her and Daniel. His attention was intoxicating, a sharp contrast to Alex's indifference. Every word, every glance from him felt like validation, something she hadn't realized she craved so desperately. "So, tell me," Daniel leaned in, his voice low, What does someone like you do for fun when you're not breaking hearts at parties? Rose blushed, laughing softly as she sipped from her glass. I'm not sure I'd call this breaking hearts. He smiled again, the kind of smile that made her knees weak. You have no idea, do you? For a moment, Rose forgot where she was. She forgot that Alex was somewhere in the room, and she forgot that this was wrong. All she could think about was how alive Daniel made her feel. He was attentive, flirty, dangerous in a way that drew her in like a moth to a flame. Suddenly, a bell rang out, silencing the crowd. Rose turned toward the source of the sound, her heart still racing from the intensity of Daniel's gaze. A tall, older man in a black suit stood at the foot of the grand staircase, his presence commanding. He had a glass of wine raised in one hand and a mischievous grin on his face. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his voice booming across the room. "I trust you're all enjoying yourselves?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The host's grin widened. He was someone important, someone with influence. Rose could tell just by the way people looked at him with a mixture of awe and respect. "Now, I know most of you are here for business, for pleasure, or perhaps a bit of both," he continued, his eyes glinting with amusement. "But tonight I want to offer you something a little more interesting." Rose's heart skipped a beat. What could he mean by that? The host clapped his hands, and a group of servers began walking through the room with trays, offering small black velvet boxes to the guests. Rose took one, her curiosity piqued. Alex, who had finally made his way over to her, took one as well, though his expression was more skeptical than intrigued. "What is this?" Alex muttered, inspecting the box. Before anyone could answer, the host raised his hand again. "Inside each of these boxes is a key to an experience, a game, if you will. Some of you will win, and some of you, well, let's just say you might walk away with more than you bargained for." The crowd chuckled, but there was a palpable tension in the air. Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down Rose's spine. "Now, open your boxes," the host instructed. Rose hesitated for a moment, exchanging a glance with Alex, who simply shrugged before flipping open his box. Inside was a small, intricately designed bracelet. It was delicate, made of gold and dotted with tiny diamonds. "Lovely," Rose whispered, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface. But there was something else, something more, a sense of anticipation, as though this bracelet was more than just a piece of jewelry. "You are now part of the game," the host announced. "Tonight, we play for keeps. The rules are simple. Wear your bracelet proudly, and by the end of the night, the connections you make will determine your fate." A murmur spread through the crowd, people whispering to each other. Alex looked unimpressed, but Rose felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years. She glanced at Daniel across the room, and he smiled, his eyes locking with hers. The evening took on a new tone. As the night went on, Rose found herself drifting away from Alex more and more. Daniel lingered nearby, his presence magnetic. Every time their eyes met, she felt a pull, an undeniable attraction that made her forget everything else. But it wasn't just Daniel. Rose noticed other people at the party watching her too. Men, women, all with a certain look in their eyes, as though the bracelet marked her for something more, something deeper. And the host's words echoed in her mind. "Connections you make will determine your fate." As the night wore on, Rose could no longer ignore the tension between her and Alex. Every time she returned to him, he was either lost in conversation with a colleague or on his phone, checking emails. It was as if they were at the same party, but living in different worlds. "Are you even having fun?" Rose finally asked, her frustration bubbling over. Alex barely looked up from his phone. "It's fine, Rose. You know these parties aren't really my thing. But they used to be," she shot back, her voice sharp with the edge of disappointment. "We used to have fun together." He sighed, pocketing his phone. "I'm sorry, okay? There's a lot going on at work right now." "Of course," Rose muttered, bitterness creeping into her voice. "It's always work." Alex frowned, clearly irritated now. "Can we not do this here?" But Rose was already done with the conversation. She turned away from him, her eyes scanning the room for Daniel. She didn't care anymore. If Alex couldn't even pretend to be interested in her, why should she keep trying? It didn't take long for Daniel to find her. His hand brushed against her arm as he leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "You look like you could use some fresh air," he whispered, his voice sending a shiver down her spine. Without thinking, Rose nodded. She followed him through the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. As they stepped out onto the balcony, the cool night air hit her skin, grounding her for a brief moment. But the sensation was short-lived. Daniel was standing so close to her now, his eyes dark and full of promise. "You deserve to be seen, Rose," he said softly, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Really seen? His words hit her like a punch to the gut. That's all she had ever wanted, for someone to see her, to understand her. And Alex had stopped doing that a long time ago. Before she could second-guess herself, Daniel leaned in and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, but the hunger in his touch quickly grew. Rose's breath caught in her throat, her body responding in ways she hadn't felt in years. Every kiss, every touch was a reminder of what she had been missing: passion, desire, connection. But just as quickly as it started, the guilt crashed over her like a wave. She pulled away, her heart racing. Rose started, but the words caught in her throat. Daniel smiled softly, his hand still resting on her waist. "You don't have to explain. I get it." Rose looked back at the door, half expecting Alex to burst through any second. But he was probably still inside, oblivious to what had just happened. He had no idea that his wife had just crossed a line she could never uncross. Rose stood on the balcony, her breath shallow as she processed what had just happened. Daniel's touch still lingered on her skin, a stark reminder of how far she had drifted from the woman she once was, the faithful wife, the supportive partner. The kiss had shaken her, not just because of the infidelity itself, but because of how right it had felt in the moment. Her mind raced. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. She was supposed to love Alex, to fight for their marriage. But that kiss had unearthed something deep inside her, something that had been buried under years of neglect and emotional distance. It wasn't just about passion. It was about being seen, being desired, and being important to someone again. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice low, almost tender. Rose nodded, though she wasn't sure what okay even meant anymore. She felt like she was standing on a precipice, looking down at the wreckage of her marriage, unsure whether to step back or leap. "I should go inside," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't push. He stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes never left hers. "I'll be here if you need me," he said softly, and with that he turned and disappeared into the party. Rose remained on the balcony for a few moments, trying to steady her racing heart. She knew she had crossed a line, one that couldn't be erased. But part of her was already craving more. That kiss had opened a door, one she wasn't sure she could close now. When she finally returned to the party, the atmosphere inside felt different. Every laugh, every touch between couples seemed charged with a kind of intimacy that made her stomach twist. She spotted Alex near the bar, deep in conversation with someone. He hadn't even noticed her absence. Typical. Rose watched him for a moment, her mind replaying all the times she had tried to reach out to him over the past few years. The late nights, the forgotten anniversaries, the empty conversations where he barely seemed present. She had been patient, she had waited, and she had hoped that things would change. But they never did. And now, standing in the middle of a room full of strangers, she felt lonelier than ever. Alex caught her eye from across the room. He smiled, but it was a tired smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. It was the same look he had given her 1,000 times before, and for the first time, Rose felt nothing in return. She took a deep breath and crossed the room to him. "Are you ready to leave?" she asked, her voice neutral. Alex looked surprised. "Already? We just got here." Rose forced a smile. "Yeah, but I'm tired. I think I've had enough for one night." Alex hesitated, glancing around the room. It was clear that he wasn't ready to leave, that he would much rather stay and network with his colleagues. But after a moment, he sighed and nodded. "All right, let's go." They left the party in silence, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. The drive home was just as quiet, the only sound the hum of the car's engine and the distant city traffic. Rose stared out the window, her mind replaying the kiss with Daniel, the way it had made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Alex parked the car and turned to her. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice hesitant, almost as if he already knew the answer. Rose looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in what felt like years. She saw the man she had married, the man she had once loved with all her heart. But now, all she could see were the cracks that had formed over years of neglect and emotional distance. She wanted to tell him everything, to confess what had happened tonight, to beg him to fight for their marriage. But the words wouldn't come. "Yeah," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just tired." Alex nodded, accepting the lie without question, and they both got out of the car. As they entered the house, the silence between them felt suffocating. Rose went straight to the bedroom, while Alex lingered in the living room, checking his phone again. It was always the same. He was always distracted, always somewhere else, even when he was right in front of her. That night, as Rose lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of her actions began to settle in. She had kissed another man. She had crossed a line, and she knew, deep down, that this wasn't something she could simply forget. The kiss with Daniel had awakened something inside her, something that had been dormant for too long. But it had also shattered the fragile illusion she had been holding on to, that her marriage could still be saved. The next morning, the air in the house felt different, heavy with unspoken tension. Alex left early for work, as usual, giving Rose a quick kiss on the cheek before heading out the door. The kiss felt mechanical, like a habit rather than a gesture of affection. Rose barely registered it. After he left, Rose sat in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and replaying the events of the previous night in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, about the way he had made her feel. But more than that, she couldn't stop thinking about the state of her marriage. She had been living in denial for so long, pretending that everything was fine, that she and Alex were just going through a rough patch. But last night had forced her to confront the truth. There was no patch. Their marriage was crumbling, and neither of them was doing anything to stop it. The hours dragged on as Rose moved through the house in a daze. She couldn't focus on anything, her mind consumed by guilt and confusion. She knew she needed to talk to Alex, to tell him the truth, but the thought of it made her stomach churn. What would she even say? That she had kissed another man? That she was no longer sure if she loved him? By the time Alex came home that evening, Rose had worked herself into a state of panic. She tried to act normal, but her nerves were shot, and every time Alex spoke to her, she flinched, as if expecting him to somehow know what had happened. "Are you okay?" Alex asked at dinner, his brow furrowed with concern. "You seem a little off." Rose forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind." Alex didn't press further, and the conversation died. They ate in silence, the only sound the clink of utensils against plates. After dinner, Alex retreated to the living room, as he always did, and Rose found herself alone in the bedroom, staring at the walls. She couldn't do this anymore. That night, as Alex slept beside her, Rose lay awake, her mind racing. She had spent years trying to make things work, trying to bridge the growing gap between them. But nothing had changed. Alex was always distant, always focused on work, and Rose was always left feeling alone, invisible. She had been patient, she had tried, but now she was at her breaking point. She had to make a decision. The weight of Rose's decision pressed down on her the entire night. As Alex lay beside her, sleeping soundly, she realized with a cold certainty that their relationship had passed the point of no return. She couldn't live in the shadows of a marriage that no longer felt like one. The kiss with Daniel had opened her eyes to the emotional abyss that she and Alex had been dancing around for years, and now it was impossible to ignore. The next morning, she woke before Alex and sat at the kitchen table, clutching her coffee cup like a lifeline. She had rehearsed the conversation in her head 100 times, but now that the moment was approaching, her stomach churned with nerves. She knew she had to tell him the truth, not just about Daniel, but about everything. How she felt unseen, how distant he'd become, how this marriage had been suffocating her. Alex entered the kitchen, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, looking half awake as he poured himself a cup of coffee. Rose watched him silently for a moment, her heart aching at the realization that this was the man she had once loved so deeply. But now, all she felt was a gaping chasm between them. "Morning," Alex said, sipping his coffee. "Morning," Rose replied quietly, her voice tight. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her hands trembling slightly as she set her cup down. Alex sensed the tension immediately. He sat down across from her, his brows knitting together in concern. "Are you okay? You've been acting strange ever since the party." Rose took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. "Alex, we need to talk." His face tensed, and his eyes flickered with confusion. "Talk? About what?" Rose felt the floodgates open, her emotions spilling out before she could stop them. "About us. About everything." Alex set his coffee down, leaning forward slightly. "What do you mean?" She looked away for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I don't know how to say this, but I haven't been happy, Alex. Not for a long time." He froze, the color draining from his face. "What are you talking about? What do you mean you haven't been happy?" "I mean that I've felt invisible," Rose said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're always working, always somewhere else. Even when you're here, you're not really here. And I've been so lonely, Alex. For years." Alex sat back, stunned. His eyes were wide, his expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Lonely? Rose, I've been working hard for us. For our future. Everything I've done has been for you. But that's just it." Rose shot back, her voice rising with frustration. "You've been working for us, but you've forgotten me. I needed you to be present, to be my partner. But you haven't been. And I've been trying to tell you for so long, but you never listened." Alex rubbed his temples, clearly overwhelmed. "Rose, I didn't know you felt this way. Why didn't you say something before?" "I did," Rose said, her voice cracking. "But you never really heard me. And now it's too late." Alex's eyes darkened, a realization dawning on him. "What do you mean it's too late?" Rose's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this was the moment to confess, to tell him everything. Her throat felt tight, and she could barely force the words out. "At the party, I kissed someone." The silence that followed was deafening. Alex's face went pale, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "What?" His voice was low, almost a growl. "I'm so sorry," Rose whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "It wasn't planned. It just happened, and I regret it so much. But it made me realize how far we've drifted apart, how much I've been missing in this marriage." For a moment, Alex didn't say anything. His face was hard, unreadable, as he stared down at the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, distant. "Who was it?" Rose shook her head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that us hasn't been working for a long time, and I don't know if it ever will." Alex stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. His face was twisted with anger and hurt. "It doesn't matter? You kissed another man, Rose. You cheated on me, and you're telling me it doesn't matter?" Rose stood up too, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I cheated, but I didn't plan it. I was so desperate for anything to feel alive again. I've been drowning, Alex, and you didn't even notice." Alex stared at her, his jaw clenched, his hands trembling with anger. "I've been working my ass off for us, and this is how you repay me? By running into the arms of another man." Rose's heart broke at the fury in his voice, but she couldn't hold back any longer. "I didn't run into his arms. I was pushed there by how neglected I've felt. I've tried to make this work, Alex, but you've been so focused on your career that you forgot about our marriage." Alex was silent, his eyes blazing with anger. The betrayal he felt was palpable. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice low and cold. "I need some time to think." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Rose standing there, her body shaking with the weight of what had just happened. She had told him the truth, but instead of relief, all she felt was devastation. For the next few days, Alex barely spoke to Rose. He left early for work and came home late, avoiding her at every opportunity. The silence between them was suffocating. Rose tried to reach out, to explain herself further, but Alex wouldn't engage. He was furious, and the distance between them had only grown wider. One night, after another long day of silence, Alex finally spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About us." Rose's heart sank as she sat down across from him. And Alex's face was hard, his expression unreadable. "I've contacted a lawyer." The words hit Rose like a punch to the gut. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A lawyer? I don't see how we can come back from this," Alex said coldly. "You cheated on me, Rose. I don't think I can ever trust you again." Tears streamed down Rose's face. "Alex, please. It was a mistake. I know I hurt you, but I've been hurting too. I felt so alone for so long, and I didn't know how else to cope." Alex's eyes flashed with anger. "So, your solution was to kiss another man? To betray me?" "It wasn't like that," Rose sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I just wanted to feel something again." Alex stood up, pacing the room, his fists clenched at his sides. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this." Rose's heart shattered. She had known this was a possibility, but hearing the finality in his voice was unbearable. "Alex, please. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can try to rebuild what we had. I still love you." Alex stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes filled with a cold sadness. "I don't know if I love you anymore." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rose crumpled onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. She had lost him. After everything they had been through, after 7 years of marriage, it was over. "I'm sorry, Rose," Alex said softly, "but I think it's time for both of us to move on." In the following weeks, the divorce process began. The house that had once been filled with love and laughter was now a battlefield of silent resentment and heartbreak. Rose spent her days packing up her things, crying over the memories they had made together, while Alex distanced himself further, burying himself in work and avoiding her whenever possible. Eventually, the paperwork was signed and their marriage was officially over. Rose moved out, leaving behind the life they had built together. As she closed the door to their home for the last time, she realized that the emptiness she had felt in her marriage had now consumed her entirely. Rose stood in the doorway of the empty house, the echo of her footsteps trailing behind her. The house no longer felt like a home. It was a hollow shell filled with memories that no longer brought comfort, only pain. She had packed her things, leaving behind the life she had once envisioned, the life that had now crumbled into dust. The weight of the divorce papers in her hand felt like the final nail in the coffin of their broken marriage. As she closed the door for the last time, she felt an overwhelming wave of grief. It wasn't just the end of her marriage. It was the end of everything she had worked so hard to build with Alex. She had poured years of her life into this relationship, into this man who had once been her whole world. But now, all she had left were the shattered pieces of what they once were. Rose wiped the tears from her eyes and walked to her car. The silence inside the vehicle felt suffocating. As she drove away from the house, her mind was filled with questions she couldn't answer. Could she have done things differently? Could she have saved their marriage if she had tried harder, spoken up sooner, or reached out to Alex in a different way? The regret gnawed at her, even though deep down, she knew the answer. The weeks following the divorce were some of the hardest of Rose's life. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far from a neighborhood where she and Alex had once shared their lives. The apartment was modest, a stark contrast to the spacious home she had left behind, but it felt more like a reflection of the emptiness she now carried within her. Every day felt like a battle to keep moving forward. Her mornings were filled with routine: wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, the loneliness crept in like a shadow, reminding her of what she had lost. She missed the familiarity of Alex's presence, even if it had been distant. She missed the idea of being loved, of being part of something greater than herself. But as the days passed, Rose began to realize that her grief wasn't just for Alex. It was for herself. She had lost touch with who she was, sacrificing so much of her identity to keep their marriage afloat. Now, in the wake of their separation, she was left to confront the woman she had become, and the woman she wanted to be. In the quiet of her apartment, Rose started to rediscover herself. She took up old hobbies she had abandoned during her marriage: painting, reading, and writing in her journal. The creativity she had suppressed for years began to flow again. And for the first time in a long while, Rose felt like she was doing something just for herself. Her evenings were spent reflecting, pouring her thoughts onto the pages of her journal. It was a painful process, unpacking the years of neglect and emotional distance that had built up in her marriage. But with each page, she started to feel a sense of release, a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could heal from this. Rose also began seeing a therapist. It was something she had resisted during her marriage, convinced that she and Alex could fix their problems on their own. But now, sitting in the therapist's office, she realized how deeply her issues with Alex had run. The sessions were hard, often bringing up emotions she had buried, but they also gave her a new perspective. She hadn't been the only one at fault in the collapse of their marriage. Alex's emotional unavailability, his obsession with work, and their mutual failure to communicate had both contributed to the breakdown. As the months passed, Rose started to feel the stirrings of desire again, something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about physical intimacy. It was about the longing to connect with someone on a deeper level. But the scars of her failed marriage made her hesitant to pursue anything serious. She wasn't ready to trust again, not yet. Daniel, the man she had kissed at the party, occasionally crossed her mind. She had cut off contact with him immediately after the party, realizing that their brief encounter had been a symptom of her deeper unhappiness, not the solution. But the memory of that kiss, the way it had made her feel alive, desired, lingered in her mind like a ghost. It was a reminder that she was still capable of feeling passion, of being wanted. But Rose knew that any new relationship would require her to be whole again, to heal from the wounds that her marriage had left behind. She wasn't ready to dive into anything new until she could face herself fully, without the baggage of her past weighing her down. While Rose was rebuilding her life, Alex was grappling with the fallout of the divorce in his own way. He threw himself into his work even more, using it as a distraction from the pain of losing Rose. On the surface, his life seemed unchanged. He still went to the same office, lived in the same house, and kept up appearances with friends and colleagues. But inside, Alex was a mess. The realization that Rose had been so deeply unhappy in their marriage gnawed at him. He replayed their final conversation over and over in his head, trying to figure out where things had gone so wrong. He had always thought he was doing the right thing by focusing on his career, by providing for them. But he had failed to see how much Rose needed him emotionally, how disconnected they had become. The divorce had left Alex with a deep sense of guilt and regret. He had always prided himself on being in control of his life, his career, his marriage. But now, for the first time, he felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. He hadn't just lost Rose. He had lost a part of himself. As much as Alex tried to suppress it, a part of him couldn't let go of the betrayal he felt when Rose had confessed to kissing another man. That moment had cut him deeply. And even though he knew their marriage had been crumbling long before that night, the image of Rose with someone else festered in his mind. In the weeks after the divorce, Alex found himself fixating on ways to get back at her. It wasn't rational, he knew that. But the hurt and anger twisted inside him, fueling thoughts of revenge. He considered sending Rose a cold, final message, something that would leave her reeling the way he had felt that night in the kitchen. He thought about making her see what she had lost, of showing her that he was better off without her. But as time passed, Alex realized that revenge wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't take away the pain of their failed marriage, and it certainly wouldn't bring him any peace. He needed to focus on healing, just as Rose was, and that meant letting go of the bitterness that had been eating away at him since the night of the party. As months turned into a year, both Alex and Rose began to find a new sense of stability in their lives. It wasn't easy, and the scars of their divorce remained. But they had both come to realize that their relationship had been broken long before the final confrontation. It wasn't just the infidelity or the arguments. It was the slow erosion of intimacy, the neglect, and the emotional distance that had slowly driven them apart. Rose continued to grow in her independence. She found new friends, reconnected with old passions, and began to envision a future where she didn't need someone else to define her happiness. She wasn't sure she would ever fully trust and love again, But she knew that she was stronger now, more self-aware. Alex, too, started to reflect on what had gone wrong. He began to take better care of himself, physically and emotionally. He cut back on work, made more time for his personal life, and slowly began to open up to the idea of dating again. It wasn't easy. His trust had been shattered, but he knew that he couldn't let one failed marriage define the rest of his life. The divorce had left both Alex and Rose with deep wounds, but in the end, it had also given them the chance to rediscover themselves. The night of the party had been the breaking point, the moment that had forced them to confront the painful truth about their marriage. But it had also been the catalyst for change, for growth, for the realization that they couldn't keep living in a broken relationship. In the end, neither of them had been perfect. They had both made mistakes, both failed to communicate, both contributed to the slow disintegration of their marriage. But they had survived, and now they had the chance to build new lives, separate from each other, but stronger for the lessons they had learned. The night that had changed everything was behind them, and now they could finally move forward,